So hello, everybody. I am Katie Karkheck. I am the programming librarian at the Scarsdale Library, and I am so thrilled to have Debby Applegate here. I have enjoyed her book so immensely, so I've been really looking forward to this. Um, just a little bit about Debby. Debby's a historian and biographer whose first book, The Most Famous Man in America, the biography of Henry Ward Beecher, won the Pulitzer Prize for biography and was a finalist for the Los Angeles Book Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award for biography, and was named one of the best books of the year by the New York Times Review, NPR's Fresh Air, a whole host of other places. She holds a PhD in American Studies from Yale University and lives in New Haven, Connecticut with her husband, workplace writer Bruce Telgan. So hi, Debby. I'm so happy you're here.
I am absolutely delighted to be here. Thanks to everyone, and thanks especially to the Karkheck clown.
Thank you. I had so much fun reading this book, and I knew that I really wanted to. The moment I read, I think it must have been the New York Times Review or journals or whatever, I said, "Oh, this sounds like this is my kind of book." I fell in love with Polly. She just sounded like, she was fun and she was smart and she was interesting and, one of those kind of people you'd love to be able to sit down and talk to. So how did you end up finding her? How did this end up being this project?
Well, I agree. That's how I felt about Polly. Even when I found out more and more about her, with things that were not always flattering or savory, I still found that I really liked her, and I liked her attitude, and I liked spending time with her. And maybe that's not surprising because the way I found her was pretty much entirely by accident. I had decided I was never going to write another book again after that first one. It was very tiring. I was very worn out, and I thought that is no way to spend such a huge chunk of my adult life. But then things went well, and I felt very flattered. And I don't have children, but I think it's a little like having children. You forget how hard it is to have that baby. And once, oh, you got such a nice baby. And that is essentially what happened. I started to think, oh, well, that went well. Maybe I should write a book, but what do I want to do? And for some reason, I did not want to stay in the 19th century, even though maybe I just had spent too much time there. And I thought, where would I want to go if I could take a time machine? Because to me, that's what reading books about history, the best ones are about. They're about taking a time machine someplace and really feeling yourself immersed in that story and that place. And so, well, where would I want to take a time machine? Why wouldn't I want to go to Jazz Age New York? Of course, maybe that's crazy, because in fact, no, lots of crime, lots of hardship, lots of hangovers. But it seemed like the place to go, and I had always loved The Great Gatsby and all the flapper books and old movies. So I was looking in the 1920s shelving of books at the Yale University Library, and just kind of going through, because I love libraries. Props to all librarians. My job would be impossible without you guys. And I was just looking for, I didn't have a plan, and this little red book popped out at me. It just called out my name, and it was Polly's memoir, and it was so much fun. It wasn't very long, probably a third as long as my book, but that's because she left a lot of stuff out. But she had that voice that I tried to give as much of as I could in my own book, that was spunky and strong, and it had a sense. She has a sense of humor about herself. She is a person who's very broad-minded, and I really appreciate that. People with sense of humor who are broad-minded, who like people. She's not the most educated person, but she learns quickly, and she is smart as a tack. And that made me think, look at this. Her book wasn't everything. She cut a lot out, but I could see already that she was a little like a Forrest Gump character. You know, she showed up at all the hot spots, or all the hot spots came to her. The hot people came to her. Her place became the hot spot that people felt they had to stop into, and that I was enough. I thought, okay, I'll just, if I have only a little bit more, you know, I'm sure I can find more on her, at least something. That'll be enough. I had no idea that I would find so much, and I had no idea that it would take 13 years. That was why I wasn't going to do this again.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like you really managed to uncover quite a bit. And I was shocked to see the inclusion of photographs. And like, you would think that somebody who works in a profession that is so secretive wouldn't keep so many records, so many
Right,
things.
right.
Where did all of this come from? What was your research process like? Because I love research and I would love to know more about that.
That's my problem. I am an addict. I am a research addict. The writing is just the hard payment that is required to because otherwise all I did was just waste all that time doing nothing but satisfying my own pure curiosity. Um, so I spent so there were that's one of the reasons it took 13 years. So there were always one new, at least every week there would be one new little thing that would lead me down a new rabbit hole. But I have to say, I figured there would be a paucity of material, and like you say, I too was shocked at how much stuff was left. Part of it, I swear, is the muses. The gods seem to want this book to be written, even though it didn't seem like a likely book. Even more important, perhaps, I think Polly wanted a book like this to be written. And I'm not being superstitious and just talking from the grave. I mean, like, I think she was somebody who, part of what I liked about her and that made her so special was her ambition. And her ambition to be a somebody, to be famous, to be remembered, an important American, a mensch, as she might have said. And she was raised very respectably. She was not somebody who was brought up on the streets, not somebody who was brought up in tremendous poverty or around a lot of vice. So for her to tumble into vice, she had all the pillars of sort of middle class upbringing. She had good work ethic. She could save money. And one of the things she had was this ambition to be a really respectable person. So she, even though she knew she was on this path, she saved trunks of material, programs and letters and scrapbooks and photographs, much more than was actually left, unfortunately, because, and let this be a lesson to everyone who inherits big trunks of things from their family. Her brother threw out most of the things because he was very embarrassed by his
That killed
sister.
me.
Yeah, despite taking her money, of course. As you know, as I'm not saying all brothers will, but that brother, not even all those brothers, but it wasn't just her. A lot of people knew her. She was famous among newspapermen and gossip columnists. She came to fame with her own scandals, and she was colorful enough that people remembered her, and they wanted, if they were not themselves lying, which many of them, most of them were, but there were some who were not, people in showbiz, people in the music industry who were a little bolder. There were a lot of people who remembered her and put her into their memoirs or put her into correspondence. And then the topper, the real topper, was when she wrote her memoir, she used a ghostwriter. She did not like to admit it because she, of course, wanted to be the big shot author, and so she just lied about that. But the ghostwriter, a brilliant woman and editor, wonderful writer, she saved most of her papers and correspondence and her writing notebooks that she
Oh,
used
that's
to
treasure
write the
trove.
book. And not everything, but a lot. Like that she, some of them, a lot of real names, a lot of real dates, a lot of things that even she was frustrated because Polly was clearly not telling her the truth, and because Polly didn't tell anyone the whole truth. And that was huge because that had a lot of the things that were cut out, including there was a list at the back of who cannot be named in the book.
Really?
And it was this. So this is in the early 1950s during the time of the Kefauver hearings, which were very famous anti-gangster hearings, and it listed pretty much every single living major gangster in America, or at least in the Northeast in California. In
Um,
Chicago, toss in Chicago. And so she had a lot to hide for good reason. And yet clearly she wanted to be known. She wanted to be remembered.
Oh, so I bet she would have loved that you wrote this book.
I'm sure there would have been times where she thought it was a pain in the ass. I'm like, stop looking down that. And I know there were men who certainly would have preferred. I found that you cannot tell who is, we all have our prejudices about who lies and who doesn't. And of course, if you are in the illegal trades, lying is, of course, a big part of your business. But I found that the higher up you were, the more respectable you were, the more likely you were to have an iron zip over your lip, so that the people who were hardest to find out about were sort of the executives, the solid middle class executives from a place like Scarsdale or Rye, or who came into town just and went home to their lives and didn't want any publicity at all.
But it's so funny because there are so many people that do talk about their time with her openly. And I was kind of surprised by that because I mean, of course, I'm looking at this from a 21st century point
Right.
of view and, have had a glimpse at what life in the underworld was like in, around turn of the century, around the 20s and 30s and all of that, just through my own work. But I don't know that I was expecting to hear as many people naming names and as many people like talking openly about all of their time at Polly's and, with, Walter
Especially a
Winchell and
brothel.
Jesse
It's one
Arnett.
thing, right? Exactly. And yes, attitudes towards prostitution were a little different. I think it was more common. So I don't know. I don't want to say that was more common. It's
Different,
very hard to say, but it was different, and it was more likely that you might, as a young man, go to a brothel for a prostitute to lose your virginity, for
right?
example, which I don't think is as common as it used to be, by anywhere near as common, even if prostitution itself has a whole new life. Thank you to the internet. Who needs a brothel? You can just you can just order up
Right.
whatever you need. But I think the other thing was, she would not have been the person she was without prohibition. I mean, that's a huge part of the story, is that even if she had lived in the same period of time, but there had not been this crazy moment where the United States decides we are never going to drink again. We are never going to have any kind of illegal alcohol for sale or to buy or to sell, and you can make it, but good luck to you. And that was a huge decision that's very difficult to imagine now. And one day, one of the oldest human vices becomes illegal. Well, that just has a radical, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Unintended consequences. One of the greatest set of unintended consequences in human history, and certainly in American history, is that by making drinking illegal, saloons illegal, anything like an old-fashioned manly bar illegal, you have given an opportunity for both an underworld that deals in booze, so the underworld grows vastly during this period of time because there's just this whole industry that was turned over to them, and that's part of what fuels some of her prosperity, fuels but it also turns morality upside down. Instead of everyone jumping on the water wagon and deciding we're going to live in a life of new virtue, all the people are like, Jesus, I could drink a beer last week and now I can't drink a beer. Now if I want to have a beer, I have to consort with criminals. I think it turned the ordinary vices that maybe were a little déclassé or for men only into forbidden but exciting, had given it a glamour. turn the underworld into a kind of chic place where instead of bars that no woman, respectable woman, would have stepped foot into, now there are all these speakeasies that are hidden away that are illegal for everyone. So all these women start going into saloons, or now they're not saloons, to drink in ways they never would have. All these well-to-do people find themselves going to illegal places that they never would have because it's fashionable and they want to see what all the fuss is about. And while they're there, they're mingling with ladies of the night. They're mingling with people from far different walks of life. They're mingling with criminals and gay people and show people, and in a way that never had happened before. And everyone is having a delight doing it. So she becomes one of those places in this new chic demi-monde. Like she calls herself a speakeasy with a harem nearby, and that, I think that's part of it, is it became kind of chic to say, oh, let's stop by Polly's and have a drink, almost like not even, you could have sex if you wanted to, but women came, many women came, many people in the gay community came, because it was a place you could be away from the public eye and let down your hair.
It's funny. I think so much of that time period has this sort of mythology surrounding it, within its place in American history. And it sounds like so much of it was really true, which is what's funny about it.
The whole time I kept thinking, okay, obviously everything is not like The Great Gatsby. And even
Right.
The Great Gatsby, pretty sordid stuff, actually, if you really look at it. And he does die in the end. And his mistress is murdered, and the rich people once again get away with everything. So, not even that glamorous at its best. But and even all the old movies, if you look at all the old gangster movies or all the old 42nd Street and the old musicals, it's still pretty gritty, even if there's a happy ending tacked on. And so I spent a bunch of time sort of trying hard to both. You can't help but get swept up in this feeling like New York City is the most exciting place in the world between World War I and World War II. People are just coming there from all kinds of places. You can live fairly cheaply. You can do anything you want there. The world is freer. And of course, the nightlife is just much wilder. At the same time, we are dealing with people in a very difficult and dangerous profession. There's clearly tons of drug addiction and suicide and alcoholism. I was talking, a number of readers have commented to me, boy, Polly gets beat up a lot. And I almost started to take it for granted. Like I forgot that, oh, of course, this chapter has a beating. I remember at one point asking my editor, I was sitting by the fire, it was winter, and working on the middle chapters where we're talking about Legs Diamond and Dutch Schultz fighting, and I'm trying to untangle how many people got killed, and I'm like, I finally said to my editor, emailed him, how many murders is too many murders for one chapter? And he immediately says 4. That's it. You can't have more than 4.
That's what he said.
Is that a rule? That 4? You just knew that off the top of your head. But it's true. Like there's so much that it loses its like even Polly, looking at Polly's notes to her with her ghostwriter, and also her editors, her agents, her literary agents' notes are at Columbia University. And you can say that just like, too many raids, too many drug addicted girls, too many abortions, like that it became its own kind of challenge, to wade through the muck.
I imagine that you gave such a fascinating glimpse into really the mechanics of how these brothels worked, and the extortion and the corruption and the handouts and it was just, I guess I never thought about it before.
I mean, yeah, it's not the prettiest side of the NYPD, that's for sure.
No, and and she just had to keep running and giving up her money, and and she really seemed to do her best to protect her girls too.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I also wrestled with, because I do think she was in a world of thieves. She was not a thief. I think that's she's pretty clear. Nobody ever calls her a thief. Nobody ever accuses her of blackmail, although at different points there's some rumors, oh, maybe that because people were getting blackmailed right and left, because even as the sexual revolution is happening over here, there are a lot of people who are taking advantage of the sexual revolution, who are still living their nice life up in the suburbs, who want both, who want to be out at night with a flapper when they're at their sales convention, and then want to go home. And of course, that is a setup for blackmail when there is a gap between public morals and private behavior that grows just too large. And divorce laws have not at all lessened, even as premarital sex has blossomed. So of course you're going to run into more problems. So she's in a world of villains. She's a pretty honorable villain, and so she tries very hard. In the FBI files of Polly that I looked at, there's quite an extensive FBI file, and they're constantly the FBI officers are constantly interviewing pimps and prostitutes and people in the underworld and asking about her, because J. Edgar Hoover really wants to get something on her. And people, not one person, they say this flat out, it says that she has ever, for example, broken federal laws by transporting a woman over state lines for immoral persons, for purposes of the Mann Act. That's what they were going to get. That's how you could kind of bring her down. They were like, no, she doesn't have to advertise. She doesn't have to bring people from abroad. People, 30, Polly herself says, 30 women would apply for every one person I hired.
Wow.
Because she had a reputation of somebody who was fair, who took decent care, as good a care as you can in a very dangerous profession, and who, was a fair boss. That doesn't mean she was an angel. She sometimes, I think, tried to present herself a little more like a den mother than a hard-nosed boss. But in as I say, I spent a lot of time with sociopaths. More, I didn't realize when I signed on for this book that it was going to be a lot of sociopaths, and she came off looking pretty good.
There were some pretty remarkable ones too.
Right. I sometimes people ask me, oh, this one or that one, which one was better? Oh, that Dutch Schultz, he seems really terrible. That like, I was like, yeah, marginally, marginally worse. And there's so much alcohol. Midway through, I was like, why are people behaving so awful? I mean, the number of names that come through of like Joe DiMaggio and Desi Arnaz, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, for heaven's sakes.
I almost fell off my chair.
Now, never proven, never fully proven, but rumor. I was like, what is making them behave in this risky manner? It was the same way I felt when writing the first book about my first subject, a very famous minister named Henry Rod Beecher, who was constantly in hot water for being accused of flirting with his parishioners and then seducing his parishioners. And why would you risk everything? Well, one thing is they didn't feel like they were risking everything. They're used to getting away with things. And I'm not saying all men have that, but certainly men at that time had a feeling you could get away with this, and you would generally. But then the other thing was just that I think they knew everything was stacked in their favor to live. Oh, and then of course we all are American, we're all humans, we like to have our cake and eat it too. I spent a lot of time, if you want to be married, if you want to get married, why are you screwing around? If you want to screw around, why bother to be married? And I was like, oh, right, we always want to have everything both ways. It takes a lot to be a biographer. You do a lot of deep thinking.
Yes. Well, I think about Polly, and I think she comes across as brazen from the beginning. And I think about her transatlantic crossing by herself in steerage as a child.
Yeah.
Like, that's wild. And her attitude about it was surprising. So I think about that sort of little immigrant girl then becoming the madam and everything in between. Did she ever talk much? Because you don't talk that much about that transition other than her time in Coney Island.
Yeah, why? You know why? Because of course she doesn't want to talk about that
Yeah.
transition. And in fact, among people who work in the sex trades, uh, even if it's only for a little while, um, that's probably one of the most sensitive things to talk about because okay there and it's one of the most difficult parts of dealing with prostitution in general is there are certainly people who are forced into prostitution, who are trafficked, who are in that doing that against their will or against their better judgment, but there are also people who decide for good or bad that they of their own free will, their own agency, that this is the choice they're going to make because they can make more money, they can support their family, they can live halfway decently, they have a place to they have a place to live at all. For a lot of people who enter the sex trade, often are people who are homeless teenagers. Or on the edge, teenagers on the edge, and that is, and they're often also people who um, there's a phrase in the sex trade, once you get the name, you might as well play the game. So there are often people like Polly who didn't have her mom and dad there to supervise her, who found herself in trouble, who found herself pregnant by someone who wasn't going to marry her, raped, so she's got some trauma. And you find not just money by turning to the underworld, you find camaraderie, you find a sense of power. I can take care of myself with nothing but myself. I don't have an education. I don't have skills. I'm just a girl, living alone, a teenager. But I can take care of myself just on my own. It's a very intoxicating form of power and confidence for kids who very often have none. And so I think there's a lot of guilt, a lot of regret. There's a lot of even if there's not guilt about having decided, okay, I'm going to start turning tricks, or half decide, and then you kind of half start, and then you get into it. Even if they're not guilty, they know that they're going to be stigmatized. There's a lot of stigma around it. It seems somehow better, at least if it wasn't your choice. For Polly, I think it was like for a lot of people. It wasn't her first choice. It wasn't her second, third, or fourth choice, but it seemed like the best choice. And I don't think she ever really wanted to say that I own it. I don't think she wanted to own it. The other thing is, even more, madams don't like to talk about the fact that they may have turned tricks. They all turn tricks. I have never seen a story of a madam where there was not some term of time at the beginning that nobody enters and becomes goes straight to management in any business. And like Polly, she clearly was better at management than at turning tricks. But she's not alone. Every madam does that. They gloss over it.
Yeah. But I thought, and we talked a little bit about this before we signed on, just with my particular background as I, previous curator of the Coney Island Museum. The way you talked about that environment and how ripe it was for people to get into a little trouble and I've read so many stories and I've seen so many pictures and I've listened to oral histories about people particularly talking about the dark rides and how you would go out and you would meet somebody and he would pay your nickel and then you'd go on this ride that's dark for maybe an hour.
Oh, an hour.
So those pictures that you sent me
a
month ago were from the trip to the moon. Some of those dark rides could be an hour long.
Oh, I did not realize that.
And they were, some of them were populated by people that were actors that would interact with you. And some of them were just an opportunity to get close to somebody.
To sit in the dark and
to be in the dark and, go through historical recreations and, all of that stuff. So it was
so the tunnel of love was not kidding.
The tunnel of love was intended to be the tunnel of love, Um,
Wow. Oh, you know
but
what?
that
I did not know
but
that.
that was so much of the teenage culture there. And, since
Sure.
everybody was coming and everybody had their freedom and everything was cheap,
Right.
people got into a lot of trouble. And
Oh, there is a moment where she is going, that's where she gets raped. It's
yeah,
after mostly it's closed, but there are still all these houses of assignation, around there because there were so many saloons. And if you're out for, if you're gonna be on holiday, you're gonna have prostitutes around
right,
cruising the avenues and the beaches, and that you have a million places to rent a room for a couple hours, and that's
right. And I had done a bunch of research on that because before Prohibition, there was the Raines Law that was in the
right.
1890s, I think. And that prohibited the sale of drinks just on Sundays.
Yeah. And
And
unless you had rooms, unless you were
unless
a
yeah,
hotel.
unless you had rooms or unless you had food.
Right. That's
And
right.
I wrote an article about the whole thing because scouring the Brooklyn Eagle, I went down my own rabbit hole.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Oh, the Brooklyn Eagle is filled with
oh my
fascinating
God, it's so
writing.
great. um, but a lot of those hotels were like, I don't know, 5 feet by 5 feet, rent by the hour. And that
Right.
was the beginning.
What are you going
That
to
was
do with all those hotels? Yeah, I mean
right.
all those rooms. I'm sorry. What with all the rooms that you have so you can run a saloon? Oh,
There
well.
were still rent by the hour rooms in Coney Island until I think 2014.
Is that true?
The Surf Hotel. The Surf
Wow.
Hotel was still
Wow.
there. It got torn
Wow.
down. I think it was 2014. So I mean, that was
I didn't
that
know
was the
that.
standard. The other thing they
It
did to
was the
get around
standard.
that's what happened there. It was the only hotel in Coney Island, but in relatively modern days.
Wow.
But the other thing that they did to get around that was these sandwiches. So they would put a sandwich and then it would be years and years old. They would just keep putting the same sandwich down. But
Isn't that is that where the phrase free lunch comes from? Because you had to
I
provide
don't
some kind of
know.
food at different points for these kind of reasons
Right.
as in a saloon to be able to serve. See, now we need to
Yeah, I don't
look
know.
that up. That's a little before my period, so
Yeah.
but I think that might be right.
But but everything that you described about the girls and the Nickel Empire and all of that is like, well, of course that's where this happened.
Yeah,
Because it
yeah.
makes so much sense because that was the culture there.
Yeah, yeah. And she loved it so. She loved Coney Island. It was where she felt freest. But of course, yeah, the Sunday school is just like she adored ragtime music and the dance halls. Well, the Sunday school teachers were not entirely wrong. That ragtime music might be the devil, and dance halls in Coney Island may lead a good girl astray.
Oh yeah, absolutely. um so yeah, I mean I found her to be fascinating. um the other thing I found interesting about her was her ability to compartmentalize
Yeah, yeah.
and how she's rubbing elbows with all of these people and she's working in this underground and she's famous, yet she's still trying to prevent her family from hearing
Well, it
about,
helped that they most of them did not speak English for a long time.
oh, that would do it.
The parents really did not speak much English even at the end. That certainly helped. They didn't come over for quite a well. It depends. She also fibs about that. Her father clearly comes over very quickly, and I think the chances are good that he did know what she was doing fairly early on. She used his name and signature to sign to for stocks, and she bought some property that was co-signed by him. And he was a man of the world, and prostitution was not as stigma. I mean, it was still very stigmatized, but it was it was taken as part of the world. It wasn't the best part of the world, but it existed. Whereas I think now we treat it a little like, oh my gosh, that's still true. Um, yeah, that you could tell Yeah, you could tell that her mother, towards till the very end, her mother did finally find out when Polly is dragged into the newspapers. I mean, at first it's word of mouth famous. It's famous among the cognoscenti and the people who need to know. It's really only when the crash comes, which completely changes the national mood and the mood in New York. Now, all of a sudden, with almost a quarter of the city out of work, people are not so tolerant of having a bunch of thieves in City Hall raiding the Treasury, and they're not so generous to the cops who are shaking down people. And in general, a feeling that the city had become more dangerous in the 1930s. So she gets swept up in the anti-corruption crusades, and she gets swept up in the the gangbuster crusades. I think probably she might have been left alone because she was so politically connected, especially to Tammany Hall, the big Democratic organization, but not just. She catered to all parties. She had tons of people who worked in Washington D.C. and in Albany, also not necessarily the cleanest of towns, and she might well have stayed safe and out of trouble had she not been sort of collateral damage of these other
Mm.
investigations. And but she didn't go to jail until 1935. She was, she'd been in business for 15 years. She'd been arrested at least 2 dozen times, probably far more, but it was impossible to say because she used different names. Um, and then when she went to the Women's House of Detention down in Greenwich Village, it was tried in the beautiful Jefferson Market Courthouse, which is now a library, a public library. Um, she only went for 30 days because Lucky Luciano helped her arrange for shorter time. And she got 5 days off for good behavior because she was an excellent inmate. In fact, my thought, she writes beautifully about her time in prison in her memoir. And you can tell it's almost like a moment. Obviously, she was humiliated and did not want to go to jail, and it cost her a bundle of money, and nothing about it was good. But it was almost a moment where she could exhale. Like, phew, nobody's trying to kill her, nobody's trying to rob her, nobody's trying to get her.
She's busy,
She is very
really
busy.
busy.
Well, and like a lot of people in that generation, she does not live a long life.
No.
She's, 62. She's that's about it. And of course, there's a lot of heavy drinking, a lot of heavy cigarette smoking in her world, but also in her. I mean, she dies of lung cancer. Although, in keeping with her pioneering status, she was an early recipient of a pioneering experimental lung operation where
Oh,
they took
interesting.
off half of her lung, but it did no good. The number of people among her friends in general who died of cirrhosis of the liver, lung cancer, and what is not often named in the death certificates is contributions of syphilis. Often,
Mm.
syphilis and gonorrhea were rampant in New York City, even among people who never would visit a prostitute.
Mm.
And people, there was no good treatment for it. I spent far more time trying to figure out what the hell how you treat syphilis and gonorrhea than I spent on a lot of things. And it took so long because it didn't really work. I was always trying to
Right,
go like, are you
right.
injecting the mercury? Are you
Oh God.
drinking the arsenic? And until we get penicillin, there are many ways in which we live in an age of miracles, and that in particular is one of them.
Penicillin is surely one of
Penicillin. It's under that and birth control. Between those two things, boy, the world just, it's not fashionable to thank the pharmaceutical industry, but really,
them.
maybe we should.
Yeah. I wondered as you mentioned her FBI file and um, the court record. I mean, she didn't even use her real name in a lot of the court proceedings, did she?
Right, and it was a problem when when they finally do get their hands on her, they're trying to figure out, well, how many times were you arrested? She says, I don't remember. And of course, it was this is an age where they're just introduced a driver's license. I mean, and most people don't have a driver. She does have a driver's license actually, but record keeping is nothing compared to what it is now. And because she knew so many cops, I mean, that was if that's how was a surprise to me, how big a role the cops played in my book and in my research. And not all cops were corrupt, but at that time, a lot of them were. I mean, that was one of the bigger shocks to me. That I know there's a lot of discussion about police departments and policing, but this was a whole new angle on policing, and it was not a very flattering. It did not help instill more confidence in the
Yeah.
police. But she had cop friends who every single time she got fingerprinted or had a mugshot taken, they would steal it. They would just go in and just take it from the records room, so that it was commented on that nobody could ever find a mugshot of her, including the FBI. And the FBI, you can see in like the margins of their reports, oh, clearly she's got partners in crime with the police. I mean, it's they have don't have a particularly good opinion of the NYPD either. And a number of cops, sorry, I shouldn't
Oh,
keep
no,
going
no,
on, but
please.
a number of cops committed suicide, who were people who she knew well. And it was because as things started to clean up, as the culture started to change, all these respectable men, their lives were going to be destroyed. So they
Yeah.
destroyed themselves first.
Well, I was surprised that she was able to have a romantic, like an ongoing romantic relationship with a cop. I'm like, Polly, what are you doing? It's like,
Well, that was not clear. I couldn't tell. Was it? I was never 100% clear. I don't think it was like a big love affair romance for
okay.
sure. That I don't think. I think, and it's not even clear to me whether or not she slept with him, to be honest. It was
Okay.
not uncommon. It was not at all uncommon for madams to have a cop that they either slept with or at the minimum kind of worked with. So I couldn't tell if they were just really good friends who collaborated. They opened a speakeasy together. He was kind of her man in the department who would give her information or tip her off if there was going to be a raid. He co-signed like he signed for the lease on one of her apartments. Obviously they were super close. She loaned him money all the time. But I could never really get a handle on were they having an affair or not, but it was very common. As she points out in one of her letters, that's in the book, that oh yeah, it pissed me off because often if a madam was sleeping with some cop, she would send that cop to come harass her rivals. Which drove Polly nuts. Oh, you're having,
Oh, I'm
you're
sure.
screwing that guy in the plainclothes department, and I got a deal.
Wow.
And
I mean, the
I
Vice Squad in
should
particular.
thank his granddaughter gave me a photo of Irwin O'Leary, her pet cop, and I was very nervous about using it because I thought, well, that's your grandfather, who was drummed out of the police department eventually. But she was a tough old Brooklynite, and she was perfectly comfortable talking about her grandfather. A little surprised, but.
Funny. Were you able to actually talk to anybody who knew Polly?
I did. I did. I don't usually like dealing with live people. I prefer dead people. They're much safer. They
Yes.
never sue you. They don't get mad at you, or if they do, they don't tell you. But they also don't yield their secrets very easily. So every time Polly was born in 1900. So there were some cousins who knew her, and but they knew her when they were much younger, or they knew her because they didn't know her really, but they could tell me about the day that they discovered, what, we have a madam in the family. And their mothers were almost always like, shh, we're not talking about your cousin, we're not talking about that. And of course, when her memoir came out in 1953, oh my god, that blew her family apart, as you can imagine. And many younger cousins were like, they would find the book and up in the top shelves and discover that was their relative. The only one, there were two people who were super helpful. One was a cousin-in-law who married one of the cousins she lived with in Brooklyn, but even she was 90, in her 90s, and she said things like, well, Polly used to take off her nice clothes and scrub the floors when she came to visit her mother for the Sabbath. Little things,
Mhm.
like that could say that you would never know otherwise. Oh, we always said Polly always brought such beautiful girls home for Sabbath dinner. Oh, she has such pretty friends. And then she says, these are names that would mean very little to people nowadays, but she says, Martha Ray, the famous comedian, and Ruby Keeler, who is a forgotten movie star now, but in the 1930s, if you've ever seen 42nd Street, one of the great
Mhm.
Hollywood musicals, she's the heartthrob of Hollywood. What, you know, but the other one was even better. It was a man who was in his 80s who had known Polly when he was in his 20s and she was near the end of her life. And they were part of the gay scene when Polly retired out in LA. A lot of the people on television, because television wasn't as prestigious as film, a lot of the people in the gay Hollywood community worked over in that little ghetto area, was what they thought of the TV ghetto. And she would often have wild parties. And one time they were driving home, they became friendly. She, the older woman, and he, this young man, and he was driving her somewhere. And he says, this is what he tells me, that it was her book had just been rejected by every publisher in New York before she finally found somebody. Her mother, here's what he says. He says, she seemed very unhappy. She was brooding. Out of the blue, she says, would you introduce me to your mother? And he says, sure, of course I would. Why wouldn't I introduce you? She says, well, that's interesting because I was just wondering because my own mother won't have me at the holiday dinner table, even though isn't it interesting, she'll take my money. And it was obviously weighing on her. It was feeling between that and and she was also starting to feel the first hints of cancer. And then she sees that she's sort of brooding in the car, and then she says, well, out of the blue, I knew Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was one of my customers. Now, this was the first time I'd ever heard this, and I would never have known had I not talked to him. And as I say, I spent a lot of time trying to confirm this, and she didn't say very much else. He said the only other thing she really said that he remembered was that she was being paid by the Democrats for the rest of her life by a regular payout to keep her silence about Roosevelt. But that, and so to go back to the older cousin, the older lady in her 90s, I had talked to this man and I had blown my mind about FDR. I do think it's quite likely. I do think it's not just like possible. I think it's likely. Um, I asked this older cousin, and she's in her 90s. All of a sudden, she goes from being super helpful and friendly to, I never want to talk to you again.
Oh my God.
Don't use my name in your book, and hangs up on me. And I thought, see, this is why I don't like talking to live people. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want them to hang up on me. I don't want them to sue me.
You must have touched a nerve there, though.
Well, what was great was she said, don't use my name in your book. She didn't say, don't use what I told you in the book. So I was like, okay, goodbye. That's what I didn't want to get more. And I have not spoken to her since then. And that was quite a long time ago. So it's possible she has passed away without knowing what I had to say about her cousin, her dear cousin.
Wow, how funny.
Well.
But I almost fell off my chair when you came to the FDR realization.
Well, again,
All right,
you find
but it kind of
yeah.
makes sense
I mean, he's
considering.
a hero. He's like a hero. If you like the Democrats, if you were, I mean, to many people, he was Father Roosevelt, and so it was shocking, but not that surprising. One thing you are as a biographer, well, not every biographer, but most biographers, you are essentially a professional peeping Tom, and you're going, even if you are very respectable and you do not, share things lightly, you are going through and finding things that were not made public, and often for very good reason. And what I was surprised by was how much discussion there was openly about whether or not Franklin had affairs, whether he could have sexual relations. There is a point at which, he's clearly talking to some woman, some very respectable newspaper editor, Dorothy Schiff, is talking to his doctor, who says, well, can he have real sexual relations? And he says, ah, yes, you have to remember, it's only his legs that are paralyzed. And she says, well, how does he do it? And of course, nowadays we are a little more sophisticated, not everyone, but perhaps those of us who spend a bunch of time looking at prostitution. I know what the doctor says, well, in the French manner, which at the time was another word for fellatio, for oral sex. And she's quite shocked. But at the time, the only people who really engaged in that sort of behavior were prostitutes. So I think it's quite likely the FDR himself may not quite have realized that they were prostitutes, but there were young women who might be willing to do that and just take it for granted. Again, I can only say likelihood, but I think it's certainly not impossible. He also loves stag parties. Loves stag parties. He would throw a stag party for his birthday every year, including when he was in the White House with all of the trimmings.
No wonder Eleanor was so angry with
I'm very eager to see this new TV show with Eleanor and see how she's portrayed.
Yeah, me too. And I read a really fabulous book about her relationship with
Lorena Hickok.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds.
Well, I also spent time trying to figure out. At one point, Polly was introduced to Eleanor Roosevelt, only in passing. But I was like, "See, you do know everybody." But I'll tell you, I spent so much time on this Roosevelt question that one of the things I came to the conclusion is, I don't know about Franklin necessarily, and of course, we'll never know for sure about Eleanor possibly having these romantic relationships outside of her marriage with women. But one thing we do know is the Roosevelt children were rascals and not. I kept trying to think, well, maybe they meant Roosevelt Franklin Jr. or Elliot, or because there were like 4 kids, at least 7 or 8 divorces between them, and not one of them. The stock died out very quickly on that side. I don't know, maybe there's a Roosevelt fan, I shouldn't be mean. But fascinatingly, Elliot Roosevelt, who was the one who was, I believe, the youngest, and the one who was closest, I believe, to Eleanor, but least to Franklin, when in his older age, retirement, writes a series of mystery novels set in Jazz Age New York. And Polly Adler plays a character in them.
Funny.
So I never got him into the brothel, but I would not be surprised if he did pop by once or twice. The Stork Club years.
It sounded like she was a pretty popular stop for everybody. So why
and she
not?
threw great parties. I mean, and that was one of the things I came to realize sort of at the end of the book was she becomes very famous also she will host parties where people of all kinds, walks of life mix and mingle. And she'll also host parties if you wanted her to host. And really one of the ways that she climbed this ladder of social acceptance was through these magnificent parties. And in that sense, she really was a Jay Gatz who managed to raise her social status inch by inch by being a host that made people want to be, at least if they didn't like her, they liked the people she had around her, and that gave her a kind of respectability and a name recognition. Of course, the difference is between Polly and Jay Gatsby is that she did all the work of throwing those parties. I felt like when I rereading, once I knew how much work went into this kind of thing, providing all that dirty laundry, all the booze and the clean glasses and just everything that would go along with, I thought Gatsby needed a party planner. There is no doubt he did not do that all himself.
Well, I loved learning about Showboat too.
Yes.
She sounded like she was a really interesting woman too.
So this is for the reader, people who have not read. This is Polly's main maid, second in command. The person who really helped keep the whole place running. Without Showboat, that was her nickname. I never got to be 100% sure of her real name. Polly would not have been able to ever be, and she's an African American woman from the South who's moved up to live in Harlem. And you can make so much more money as a Black woman working for these illegal establishments. They often made quite a lot of money. Of course, they're more dangerous, but they really are the ones who keep the underworld going in many ways. And what was really sad, and I know we have some limited time here, but what was really tough, because this is ending on one of my disappointments, was that we have in her files are the people they had to reach out to get permission to mention their names in the memoir. And she has written extensively about how Showboat was her aide de camp, the person who helped make her so important and so famous. And Showboat says, listen, she's already retired herself. And she says, listen, if you're the reason why I was so important to you is because I'm tough and I know how to make a buck too and run a business. If you're gonna want to talk about my story, you're gonna need to pay me. And I think it was several $1,000s. And Polly, who was always tight with a dime, even in the best of years, was like, "No, I'm not going to pay. I'm not going to pay that bitch." Is actually what she said, and so she had to write her out, and it is really a tremendous loss for me because I didn't get to see all the stuff that had been there, and a tremendous loss for history because I think it was a lens into the African American culture of the Harlem Renaissance in those years that was so important. That's very different. So this book is about the underbelly of the underbelly, really, if you think about it. I was like, oh, wait, there's a little sordid version of Vice that I missed. I mean, I'm sure there are many, many.
Oh, I'm sure there's more somewhere.
But, that one really bothered me. Polly, a couple $1,000. Come on, why?
Yeah.
You know, that's how she got ahead.
So my last question then, and I will just open it up to anybody else, is, are you researching anything now?
Oh my God, no, I'm doing absolutely nothing. I'm having a hard time even doing like anything. Like I'm barely keeping the house clean. I'm keeping up with my Netflix queue that was long neglected. I have no idea what I'm gonna do next. Writing a book is idiotic. Who reads books anymore? I know. I'm talking to
You're talking to a
your
librarian.
whole business. Your whole business is a bunch of books all the way around. It's a lot. I don't know why I take so long. I don't know why I go so deep. Next time I'd like to write some. I don't even like long books. I like short books. I don't like the kind of books that are so heavy that you have to like rest them on your chest if you're going. So no, not a damn thing.
Okay.
And I am not taking suggestions.
I wasn't going to suggest anything.
You'd be amazed.
I just know the draw of the archives, and what you did say about being a peeping Tom is very much
Oh,
true.
if I
I mean,
could
it's
just
true as an archivist too, because you have to document it. You have to read it, you have to describe it, you have to do all of that.
archivists and librarians, those are the best people. Well, that's probably what will lure me back in. I don't know. I'll find something that I do feel like I'm not maybe done with the 20s yet, and even some of the gangsters. I became a real fan of old gangster movies, and which is weird because I don't really like guns. I don't have a crime fixation. I think probably all those guys are no, they're sociopaths. They probably would not be good company, most of them. And yet there is something about that era it is fascinating.
And they're so romanticized.
Yes, they get all the attention.
Yeah.
I think that's because you can see it in the way we rate movies, that you can kill 25 people in a movie and it's not considered shocking. But if you have one person who takes off their clothes, all of a sudden it can be a big to do. And I think it extends all the way.
Yes. I will agree with you on that. Does anybody have any questions for Debbie? I've been hogging the whole conversation.
Well, it is a beautiful day. I hope that those who did manage to scrape their way away from the beautiful sunshine, I really appreciate it.
Yes. And for everybody that did not read the book, there is a link on the registration page on our website for a signed copy from Bronx River Books.
Yeah.
So they have created a landing page that is linked.
You
So
could also watch the very, very terrible movie made in 1964 of A House Is Not a Home with, you can see it on YouTube for free. It's not a good condition, with Shelley Winters as Polly. She looks nothing like Polly, and the movie is terrible. But if you wanted the Cliff Note version.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I might do that because why not?
I can't really recommend it, but you can try.
Okay.
It's got Raquel Welch. It's her debut,
Wow.
her film debut in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Does anybody have any questions?
No, just a thank you if we might. This was absolutely wonderful, fascinating, so much fun. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for you did a good job with the moderator, obviously. I'll give you the thanks since
She
all
was
of
a
us
joint project, by the way.
Well, it makes a difference. I will say, yeah, you want somebody who's enthusiastic, and boy, thank you, Katie, for in general, that not
Thank you.
everyone is unflappable. Some people are a little shocked, actually.
Oh, I've had my own research rabbit holes that I've gone down with some pretty salacious details. So it takes a lot to shock me. So
Well, and if there are people who watch this later and have any questions, I'd be delighted. You're welcome to share all of my information.
please. Okay, great. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
No, just a great thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Is there an ebook version? Because my vision is very bad.
Yes,
Yes.
there is, and there's a large print version, I
I
believe.
don't do as well as I do with an ebook.
Yes, there is. There is an ebook, and apparently it's pretty good. I know some people who have listened to it and said it was good. They did ask me if I could help them with the Yiddish pronunciation of some of the words, and I said, no, you'll have to ask an expert. It is. I will warn you, it is a bit of a long book to listen to, but apparently I tried to choose somebody. They gave me 5 little clips of people talking. They were all women, and I could choose the voice, and 3 of them were just dry as dust. I don't know how anyone would have stayed awake. So I tried to choose the one with a sense of humor. The
And
best
she
sense
did
of
a
humor.
great job. I listened to about half and read about half because
Yeah.
I have a lot to do.
No, reasonable. That's fine. I think it's
but she
equal.
did a great, her
I don't look
inflections
down.
were good.
Okay.
She voiced people well. She did a great job.
Okay.
And if you do need help getting the ebook, it is linked on that registration page, or you can call me at the library tomorrow and I can help you.
Thank you. Well, it was a wonderful time spent listening.
Thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Warner. Thank you for coming.
Norma.
I want to thank you as well.
All right.
From Michigan calling in.
Ah, I love
Heather Karkheck.
I love it.
By the way, my 8-year-old wants to know if it's child appropriate for the book.
Oh, no. I was asked to speak at a high school, and they said, well, you can talk about the first book. And I was like, well, even the first book, it has a climactic sex scandal. And they're like, well, why don't you just talk about what it is to be a writer? Because that's boring. No, but I'm doing nothing exciting.
She could definitely read the entire book, but I'd have to explain things that I don't really want to explain.
You would definitely not want to explain most of this book, and I know your precocious daughter, and you'd have a lot of questions, I think.
She is a big time reader though, so that's good.
Reading things that are slightly inappropriate is a way to grow. Reading things that are too inappropriate, that's a way to ruin your child.
Well, very good. Thanks for inviting us. And
Yeah. I also want to say a quick thank you. I'm in Atlanta and I do violence prevention research.
We've lost Lori.
Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah.
Oh, you muted yourself, Leanne.
Am I unmuted?
Now you are.
Sorry, I'm on my AirPods and they don't work as well as I want them to. I just wanted to say thank you also. And I'm in Atlanta. I do violence prevention research and we're doing some sex worker research now. And so to hear all of the research you've done from the past, I just started reading the book, so I haven't gotten as deep into it as I'd like to, but it's just fascinating to hear the differences in the way things were approached, and the way prostitution was envisioned and the way sex workers were looked at and all of it. So my mind is just reeling. I'm really just interested in all of the things that you found in sort of the historical context versus what it looks like today. So,
Well, thank you for
super,
doing that work. That's really important and really difficult work. I came away from this project thinking so much about prostitution that I thought I need to have an opinion about what should be done. I guess I don't even know if it's what should be done, but it does seem like it certainly is always an ongoing trouble to society in one way or the other. And as I was saying, that the problem is it is something which people are trafficked. There are sex slaves, but there are also people who are like, listen, this is how I'm taking care of my kids, and that's what I want to do, and it's better than working in a factory. And it's very hard to find legal approaches, social approaches that can encompass both of those things. And so anyone doing the kind of work you're doing, I know you are working in one of the great human conundrums, great conundrums of human history. So thank you for doing that, Leanne, and thanks for the nice work. Nice
well,
words.
thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. It's fascinating. I wish I could put 13 years of my research into a book. So I admire that persistence. That's
You
fantastic.
think you do. You think you do. The grass is always greener. Whereas I wish I did something that helped anyone. So I'm not kidding.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And please be in touch.
Please,
And,
thank you very much. And we did not even talk about Scarsdale, but thank you to the good people of Scarsdale, which has a tiny little minor mention in the book. So,
yes,
all right.
I caught it.
Thanks everyone. Thanks to the whole Karkheck family, Mr. and Mrs. Warner, and everybody who tuned in who I can't see. And thanks, Katie. Thanks for making it so much fun. I hope we have a chance to cross paths again, maybe in Coney Island.
Please, we'll have to do that for sure.
Thanks. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye.